Hi, everybody. Welcome to Coach Menachem tonight on this beautiful Sunday night. Everybody is here tonight. I really appreciate you joining. And tonight is Shir 220. And I first thank of every week for all the people that post it and let people know about it. Like I say, not every program might not be negay for you or relevant to you or, intrigues you, but post it, let people know about it. And Sichas Chaverim, you never know who you're going to help. People, it's very interesting. Just last week, random person like just came up to me, said the topic last week really spoke to him and he listened and he really, really appreciated it. So you never know. If anyone wants to join our WhatsApp groups, please WhatsApp me at 732-314-7010. I'll send you the community link where we post all the shiurim and all the replays. And please join us every Sunday night. Again, if anybody's watching this video on the replay on YouTube, click on the subscribe button. So every Monday morning when Menachem posts it, you get a notification. Click on the like button. And I thank to all the advertising sponsors that posted every week, the Liquid Scoop, Ellen Arrow, Five Town Central, and Chayla Kaufman from JCN for posting on all the Jewish digital platforms. Every Sunday night at 9 p.m., we have different shiurim, different topics. Next week, February 16th, we're going to have an amazing program with Rabbi Kirsch, a world famous speaker, he's a very deep thinker. The title of the program is What is My Soul Seeking? A deep dive into Hashem, spirituality, and the afterlife, eternal life. It's going to be an amazing program. It's going to be like a deep thinking program. So please join us, let people know about it, and join us. Okay, tonight shir is shir 220. Or no, if we just canceled, Menachem, are you doing the gematria?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so 220, Menachem will take away the gematria. Take
So
it away.
first, Rabbi Noir, we miss you. Hope to see you next week, Mitzvah Hashem. So we're doing tonight number 220, discussing parenting kids with hidden differences. So he says the only way you can do that is with abundance of love. And 220 is Gematria, Ahava, Rabo.
Beautiful.
So thank you, Rabbi Noir.
Okay, now we're going to turn over back to Coach Menachem Bernfeld. Sunday night, Super Bowl Sunday. The oil was busy. What are we doing here tonight, Menachem? What are we talking about?
Amazing, great question. And I want to welcome everyone, like every week. Welcome to another Let's Get Real with Coach Menachem. We're doing, with a lot of Siyata Deshmaya, number 220, Baruch Hashem, the topic, parenting kids with hidden differences, how to support extra-sensitive, complex, and neurodivergent children. So we'll have a discussion tonight, but just in general, talking about chinuch, and I know Rabbi Shais Taub has his courses on chinuch. I've heard feedback, personally, people have mentioned the unbelievable, the growth that the inner growth that the parents get just from taking those courses. But just thinking about when we want to be mechanech our kids, we want them to do, when they're very young, we want them to behave, to do the right thing, and pretty much, follow. Whatever we tell you to do, this is what you do. And some people could feel like you're pushing them into the mold that you would want them, that feels good for you, the way you would want them to look. So you have those kids that, after a while, okay, they pick it up. After a few times, they just get it. They make a decision. I'd rather listen to the parents, to the Rabbi, the teacher, to the adults in the room, because it's just too hard to be myself, try new things, misbehave. So you have those kids, and from the parents' point of view, it looks amazing. Wow, this child, he's a tzaddik, and we'll call it the A student, maybe some perfectionism. It's just not to get under the radar. It's something to think about. I tell people I'm concerned for the A student. You want them to be a little kids. You don't want them to grow up when they're very young. Slowly, it takes time. But then you have those that no matter what you tell them, no matter what you guide them, you tell them, and it just doesn't work. Whether they can't or it doesn't work for them. And day in, day out, parents are having a hard time. The teacher, the Rebbe in the class. And what do you do? What do you do? It's hard to run a class. Talking about, everything looks amazing. But for some reason, they just don't quiet down, don't calm down, they don't follow. They're not like those students that we would love, like everybody else. And that's a great question, especially for parents. And when they come home, misbehave, what do we do? So that's a conversation Emet Hashem to have tonight with Rabbi Shais Taub and Dr. Bass, Emet Hashem, somebody who deals with this, talks to the parents, and has seen results. And this is what we're looking for. Some people are lost, trying to figure out what's going on. Others are in the parsha, slowly figuring it out, but what's the next step? So Hashem, we should have a lot of siyata d'shmaya. Hashem should help us, and we should help those little kids. I just want to mention a line that I saw. It's the creative adult is that child that survived. Something to talk about. That creative adult, that you still have that creativity, that self, is that child that survived. You got to survive those years, whether in class or in a family. You got to survive, behave. So, thank you very much.
Coach Menachem, beautiful opening. Okay, let's get into tonight's program. Okay, tonight with we have Rabbi Shais Taub and Dr. Bass. The topic is parenting kids with hidden differences, how to support extra-sensitive, complex, and neurodivergent children. Rabbi Shais Taub is going to open it up, and then I'll read Dr. Bass's bio, and then she'll open it up even further. Rabbi Taub.
Okay, awesome. And Oshi, I'm complimented that you're not going to read my bio because I'm on here every other week.
Rabbi Taub, you're on every week. I can't read your bio every week. It doesn't work.
Every other week. But I love it here. It's like coming home. Okay, so it's interesting, by the way, because every time I come on here, we try to talk about something that is an unspoken issue, maybe it has a little stigma around it, and every time we bring up something new, and it's interesting, we've never touched this topic, and it definitely qualifies as something that affects a lot of people. Doesn't affect everybody, but affects a lot of people. There is definitely a lot of stigma around it, a lot of misunderstanding, fear. And so great, let's just get it out in the open. Okay. So let me give you a little background, how I come to this. As I often repeat, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a therapist. I don't have any type of clinical background or training whatsoever. I'm a rabbi, and hopefully I'm a sensitive, compassionate person who cares about people. Hopefully, I try to be. Okay. I have become aware, partially through helping others and also trying to understand myself more and more, about this buzzword called neurodivergent, which is a big fancy sounding word, but it really just means that you're wired differently. Doesn't mean better, doesn't mean worse. Divergent just means different than the norm, which we call neurotypical. Okay. And that's become, among some circles, a buzzword. It's a diagnostic term, and that's not necessarily a word that we have to use. And that's why also in our publicity for this shir, we used other words. And it wasn't for euphemism. It wasn't to be, lashon nakiya, because we don't want to use the word neurodivergent. So because that doesn't have to be exactly what we're talking about, but it's approximate to what we're talking about. What we're really talking about is this. Sensitive kids, often very bright kids, very deep kids, who have a lot of milas, a lot of positive qualities. But the way that they're wired just makes it really difficult for them to function in day-to-day life. Now, they're not special needs to the extent where everybody sees them and recognizes them and therefore accommodates. To the contrary, maybe a lot of these kids are in regular classes, in regular schools, and they're not being accommodated in any way. That's also why we refer to it as hidden differences. And maybe in some ways they're advanced in certain areas, like they could be very advanced. And then in other ways, they're super, super immature. And there's this huge discrepancy often between different areas of development. And so these kids are really, really suffering. Often they're able to hold it together through the school day, and they come home and collapse. and they have a meltdown. And their parents are absolutely beside themselves. What do you do with this kid who's twirling around, he's hooting and he's hollering, he's making noises, and he's screaming at his siblings that they're making noise, and he's ordering everyone around, and he's just almost impossible to live with. And what we wanted to do tonight is sort of demystify this topic. I'm not the expert, but Dr. Bass is an expert. I'm someone who's passionate about this topic. And what we wanted to do is sort of get it out in the open and talk about like what's happening with these kids and how can parents of these kids be more supportive so that not only are these children not miserable and the parents are not miserable, but we can actually be happy and successful, and these kids can enjoy life and grow up to accomplish whatever it is that Hashem sent them here to accomplish. So that's what we're here for. But Dr. Bass really is the expert. I'm sort of just here in a supportive role, and I'm going to hand it over to her.
Okay, I'm going to read Dr. Bass's bio, and then she'll open it up. Dr. Bass, PhD, is a clinical psychologist and parent educator. She's the host of the annual Parenting Complex Kids Summit, an online conference that brings together thousands of Jewish parents to hear top professionals in the field of psychology, OT, speech, and coaching. She deeply understands the family dynamics and the parental stress that come along with having a behavioral challenging child, and uses her knowledge of psychology, group dynamics, and personal experience to help parents deeply understand and enjoy the most sensitive, intense, and difficult children. Dr. Bass, thank you for joining us tonight. Just to tell everybody, Rabbi Taub was just literally on just 2 weeks ago. We had a very, very powerful share with him with Dr. Ham, but he called us back and he said it's important to do this program. Dr. Bass is available. He's available. They are starting a course. And again, anybody who has, is dealing with these issues definitely should try to sign up. But I said, Rabbi Shais, Rabbi Taub brings the issues to the table. He asked for a Sunday night. We accommodate. Listen, he's one of the chevra. He's one of the, he's one of the chevra.
One of the regulars.
You got it. That's right. So, Dr. Bass, the floor is yours. Please open it up.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi Taub, Coach Menachem, Mr. Parnas. So, I'm sitting here with being called the expert. Am I the expert? That somehow feels conclusive. Like I have figured this out. I am very much in process, but I have all the credentials. I will tell you I have all the credentials, and I came to motherhood with all the credentials. I was, most of the way through my doctorate in clinical psychology. I had a degree from Stanford in developmental psychology. I had 2 master's degrees in psychology and was almost a doctor. And my transition into, I thought I was so prepared to be a mother, right? So prepared. And all that training almost counted against me. So many mothers of complex kids feel like I need to know more. And I'm always going like, you could not know more than I knew coming into motherhood. But my first 3 kids all had their own complexities. One in particular was having these really long, very intense meltdowns, and I really couldn't figure them out, right? And I think because I was trained as a clinician, I was looking for a diagnosis, and I felt like if I got the diagnosis, then I could fix the problem, right? Because I was in the medical model. I was in this model of like, something's wrong with your knee, you take an x-ray of your knee, you see what's wrong with the knee, you fix the knee. And what was happening with my child didn't fit the medical model at all, right? There's a model called the social model of disability that kind of says like, people can be environmentally disabled, right? There are people who are Harvard professors who cannot go into crowded malls because they're wired in a way that gets so overstimulated from the noise that it shuts them down. So I had this child who was doing beautifully in school, who was one-on-one, often a fantastic child, really had a chain. In some ways, I felt like I was parenting this little tzaddik. He didn't need to eat. He didn't need to sleep. He was super into whatever he was into. He had a ton of energy. And then he would have these massive meltdowns that I couldn't figure out. And as I went to professionals, I was getting a lot of behavior modification stuff to try to end the meltdowns. A lot of rewards plus consequences plus consistency equals behavior change. And it left me feeling isolated. And that's really why I'm so passionate about what I'm passionate about. Because when I talk to parents of kids with hidden differences, there's a very profound feeling of isolation, because no one can see that my child is wired differently, and because they're mostly holding it together in the outside world. When they don't, it's embarrassing. It looks like it has something to do with my parenting. So as I was trying this rewards plus consequences plus consistency kind of model, it was eating away at my self-esteem, because the more consequences I enforced and the more consistently I did it, the more power struggles I was ending up in with my child. It impacted our relationship. It impacted my marriage, because I was busy telling my husband, I'm trying this rewards plus consequences plus consistency, and I'm struggling with the consistency. And then our child was struggling, and he was like, maybe you're not being consistent enough. And then I felt like he wasn't being supportive. And it really was a disaster for us. And I found this world of moms online, many of whom were professionals, going like, something is wrong. I have this child, and this is what I found these other moms who are describing my child. And it was really through those groups. It was through other moms online. It was through a fantastic summit called the Bright and Quirky Summit, that I felt this unbelievable sort of shed of guilt and shame and isolation when I went, oh my gosh, there are other moms who get it. There are other moms who see the good in these kids, because my child's awesome, and who are kind of going at it from a real place of deep understanding of self-growth and development. And that started a real journey of connection with my child, understanding with my husband, and led to kind of this incredible family that we've become. So that's the journey that I love to bring parents on. It's very gratifying work for me. It makes a lot of meaning out of a lot of pain. And so if I'm an expert, it's from that. It's not from all the wonderful letters after my name. Those actually just kind of confused the point. Okay. Should we open it up to questions? Is there anything else?
No, I'm gonna take it from here. Okay, we're gonna first do a poll. I'm gonna ask a few questions, and then we're gonna open up the questions. Anybody wants to ask Dr. Bass or Rabbi Taub a question, please feel free. Let's do the polls. Okay, it's a 3-question poll. Here we go. First question. Do you ever feel like your child experiences the world more intensely than others? 3 possible answers. Yes, my child seems extra sensitive, anxious, or reactive. B, sometimes, but not sure if it's unusual. Or C, no, my child is pretty easygoing. Number 2, have you ever felt frustrated because regular parenting advice doesn't seem to work for your child? Number 1, yes, all the time. I feel like I'm parenting in uncharted territory. Number 2, sometimes some things work, but others don't. Or C, no, typical parenting advice works well for my child. Number 3, which of these situations sounds most familiar to you? 5 options. My child has intense meltdowns or big emotional reactions. A. B. My child is rigid, anxious, or struggles with transitions. C. My child has difficulty with friendships or social situations. D. I often feel exhausted trying to meet my child's needs. Or D. All of the above equally. Five seconds, and then we'll share the results. Five, four, 3, 2, 1. Okay, now we're going to share it. Okay, number 1, do you ever feel like your child experiences the world more intensely than others? 78% of the people here tonight. Yes, my child seems extra sensitive, anxious, or reactive. 16% sometimes, but not sure if it's unusual. 6% no, my child is pretty easygoing. Second question. Have you ever felt frustrated because regular parenting advice doesn't seem to work for your child? Yes, all the time. I feel like I'm parenting in uncharted territory is 40%. 54%, the number one answer, sometimes some things work, some things don't. 6% no, typical parenting advice works. And the last question, which of these situations sounds most familiar to you? The number two answer, 24% of people said my child has intense meltdowns or big emotional reactions. 30% my child is rigid, anxious, or struggles with transitions. 12% my child has difficulty with friendships or social situations. 15% I often feel exhausted in trying to meet my child's needs. 36%, the number one answer, all of the above equally. So, Dr. Bass, I think we're speaking to the right people tonight.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that middle question of like some things work and some things don't, I think that's the most confusing piece of parenting a child with hidden differences is that when they're not overwhelmed, sometimes the typical parenting advice works. And when they are overwhelmed, it's like, you know, throwing uncooked spaghetti at the wall, just nothing sticks. So it's the same kind of parenting in different situations. It gets really variable the results. It's very crazy making in the beginning and until you kind of understand your child more deeply and you can understand why it's working sometimes and why it's not working sometimes.
So I think we should start with the basic some information. The question is, what do you mean by complex kids? You know, is that a code for something else? I think basic info before we start, just to get an idea.
Rabbi Taub, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll give a short answer, and then you can fill in the rest. The short answer is it's not a code. It's pretty accurate. Complex, like we've been saying, there are a lot of inconsistencies here because we saw the number one answer to the question about do regular parenting methods work? And the number one answer was, well, sometimes, but then other times it doesn't. And I think complex as opposed to what? As opposed to simple. Simple means it's one thing all the time. You figure out how to crack the code, and then you pretty much have a system, and that's what you do, and you replicate. Complex means something that works one moment doesn't work the next moment. It means that you never know what kid you're going to get at any given moment. So complex really is an accurate description of these children. What I would like to sort of put out there is that for me, I believe that the key to making this less confusing for parents is to start to understand what's going on behind the scenes. In other words, if you're just looking at this child's behaviors, it's so confusing. He's sitting there like a tatalid, davening or benching from a siddur 1 minute, and then the next minute he's acting. He's a 12-year-old who's acting like a 3-year-old getting into a fight with a toddler sibling. It's like it doesn't make sense when you look at it from the outside. But once you start to understand the inner world, and I want to talk about that tonight, but not just yet, but I'm sort of giving a sneak preview. Once you start to understand the inner world of this child, how he's experiencing reality, how things are actually affecting him, when you can't exactly understand it, but once you can have a little bit of empathy for the intensity of his inner world, and I try to facilitate that for parents, that understanding, that itself makes it less confusing. But because then you can, first of all, you can start anticipating when the child may be overwhelmed, when it's going to be extra challenging, how to provide support preemptively before the meltdown, or even if you can't do any of that, but at least it's not so confusing because it's like, okay, there's a reason, there's a cause and effect. It's not random. So that's to me what complex means.
Yeah, I'll dovetail on that for a moment. I think as a parent, the other thing that adds to the complexity is that when, again, that isolation piece, when you have a child who feels misunderstood or not seen, that's an additional stress on this child who already walks around with his cup of stress 99% full. So the parent understanding actually decreases the child's stress, but the child actually shares in sort of a parallel process that experience with the parent. The parent starts to walk around the world feeling deeply misunderstood because they are carrying a stress that no one can see. They're carrying a confusion that no one can see. And so it creates a degree of complexity in the parent's inner world and experience because the parent is losing it more. The parent is feeling resentful towards this child. The parent is feeling all this guilt and shame because they're feeling this resentment towards the child. And so this process of deeply understanding the child is healing for the child and also for the parent. And I think sort of raises your level of consciousness into this place of like being truly, truly from the deepest, most caring place as a parent, curious about a kid who you really don't understand. And you start to walk around the world and understand people's different wiring and have a lot more compassion as you go through this process. So it's complex because the child is complex. It's complex because the dynamic is complex. It's complex because it triggers all your stuff and gives you the opportunity to work on it. It is truly complex. It is not a euphemism.
I just want to post the link to the program that Rabbi Taub and Dr. Bass are doing together. It's starting Tuesday. The registration ends Monday night. So anybody who was listening to this now or before then, please, if you have any kid that's, this might be negated to, please join. I just want to ask one question just to follow up on this. Like parents that are listening, how do they know if maybe they're just a bad parent? Maybe they're just parenting bad. The kid is just acting out and they're screaming and they're getting stressed out. But the kids are just a normal kid. It's just that you suck at parenting. How do you differentiate that? Good
I get
question.
this question all the time. I'm going to lead on this one, Rabbi Taub, because I get this question all the time. And I had this question. I was sure if I could just find the right parenting technique, then everything was going to settle. And I think probably the truest answer is that if you're asking the question, you're probably not a bad parent, right? Because bad parents often are so uh, out to lunch that they're not deeply thinking about their parenting, right? I've had so many clients over the years who had parents who couldn't meet their needs but were doing the best they could, and it's a very different kind of emotional inner world than parents who are truly out to lunch and so involved in their own trauma history that they really can't parent. So if you're asking the question, maybe I'm just a bad parent, you're already in the boat of parents who is self-reflecting about their parenting, and that's a good thing. The second is very often, I would say about 80% of parents who ask me this question already have more than one child, right? And they already have children who are behaving differently, who are responding very differently to we all take that initial chinuch class, right? That tells you, these are the rules of potty training and these are the rules in your house and this is what we do when kids hurt each other. And there's usually already multiple other kids in the family who are responding to those techniques. So if you are in that boat, kind of letting that in, there is a resistance as parents, I think, to accepting this child is different. They're going to have more struggles in the world. And I think part of our pushback to that is to sort of blame ourselves. Like, well, I don't have to, accept that this child may experience pain more deeply, may go through the world in a way that's inherently more stressful. I'll just go, oh, if I could just get it right, they would stop struggling, right? So it's often like kind of a defense mechanism, a protective mechanism. And so my answer to it often is like, if you really tune in, you kind of ask that resistance to step aside. Sometimes sometimes you're really besafek. I don't know. And you can go, I often suggest going to an OT first. You can hash it out with a professional and go, I don't know. Is there some parenting technique that I'm missing for this child? Or is this child is this sensitive neshama stuck in a small body and they're just going to be in more pain. So sometimes it does require another person to bounce it off of, especially if you're a young mother, especially if this is your first. It's a legit question to ask. I understand where it's coming from. If you're asking it, you are most likely a very good parent who is trying to figure this out, and you do have a differently wired kid. But bavakasha, go to someone who is older than you and wiser than you and deals with differently wired, high-stress kids all day, who can look you in the eye and say, you know, I've worked with hundreds of kids, and this is what I think is going on for your child.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, let's go to the first live question. You're on.
Hi, first of all, I want to thank everyone, Usher Parnas and everyone here. Really appreciate this. This was something that me and my wife struggled with, and we are very excited to know that there is a diagnosis, so to speak, for this type of child. What I did notice, in addition to everything else that you said, Rabbi Taub, and you mentioned, there was a big issue with eating and nutrition. And I'm curious, number one, is there any correlation between this type of personality, I guess, and lack of eating? Or is it like the chicken and the egg, and because of lack of nutrition, it just kind of intensifies the situation, or none of the above?
Let me jump in first, because I want Dr. Bass to complete the answer more fully. I want to give a piece of it, just a sliver of it. The sliver of it that it's the sliver of it that I feel qualified to give as a rabbi. That's the spiritual component. And that's really what I'm here for. I look at this from a very spiritual perspective. So these kids, one way that it helps me to understand this whole sugya is neshamas that are not settled in their bodies. That's where the sensitivity comes from, you know, the hypersensitivity, the sensory issues, the feeling the tag in the shirt and the going crazy because your sister's chewing too loud at the table and all that super sensitivity. Basically, it's this neshama in a body, and all the senses of the body are just too intense for it. That's also where like the clumsiness comes from, because it's like I can't even navigate my body. I don't have that kinesthetic awareness. A lot of stuff like, you know, like the time blindness, because time, that's such a physical thing, you know, like you come down into Zman and Mokim, the space and time, and like all the constrictions and limitations of physicality. And for a neshama, pure neshama, it's so weird. And so the way I look at it is, you're talking about these sensitive neshamas that don't fully integrate into physicality, into their embodiment. And the eating thing, along with, by the way, a lot of other stuff that turns into neglect of the body, such as like being oblivious about hygiene stuff, which is funny because you can have a kid who's super fastidious, like really hung up on, oh, you can't use that cup, that dirty cup, you can't use that dirty cup. And the next minute it's like you realize, but you haven't taken a shower in a week. Like, but the inconsistency comes from this obliviousness of like not being fully settled in the physical container. So the not being able to eat is very like representative of that whole thing of like, eat, like what even is this eating thing? Like for a neshama, like a soul is eating. That's such a weird thing. So the food stuff and a lot of other, you know, personal physical things that have to do with just maintaining the body, health and hygiene, sleep, neglect, like not being able to sleep, like seeing a kid who's literally exhausted, and it's like, go to sleep. Oh, like, no, really go to sleep. I don't know, maybe I'll sleep. Like, what are you not getting about sleeping? What are you not getting about eating? And so from a spiritual perspective, to me, this whole personality profile clicks into place when you realize one thing that's super consistent about it. It's like this neshama that came to the physical world and never fully integrated into what souls and bodies are all about. That's the way that I look at it.
Beautiful.
I appreciate that response.
Yeah, but Dr. Bass can elaborate on this.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna bring it down, right? I'm gonna kind of bring it down from the spiritual through the psychological and into the physical world. And I think that's why we're a good pair. So you have this soul that's really uncomfortable in a body. And it lives with a sort of degree of stress load and discomfort that few of us do, right? If you're going through the day with like a mild headache, like everything kind of feels overwhelming, that's sort of the norm. And so here's this, soul kind of clumsily rattling around this body in a very high stress way. The body is busy feeling a lot of stress because the world is uncomfortable. I move through the world in a way that is stressful. And so it amps up my levels of adrenaline and cortisol, right? I live in a high stress situation. I live on the border of fight, flight, or freeze all the time. And so any straw that breaks that camel's back can send me right into fight, flight, or freeze, which is why so many of our kids have very dramatic meltdowns, like, from 1 minute to the next. But when you are flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, it's hard to eat and sleep. Adrenaline and cortisol make it hard to fall asleep and stay asleep. They make it hard to experience pleasure from food. Food just becomes like a body maintenance thing. And one of the ways that we try to decrease stress is to create predictability. So a lot of our kids appear very rigid. They want things their way at their times, and food is fairly unpredictable, right? A lot of our kids, when they do eat, they eat junk. They eat cornflakes and processed meat and processed cheese and white bread because it's very predictable, right? The package of blueberries, every blueberry is different, and I might get a sour one, and that's scary. But when Rabbi Taub is smiling, but that predictability.
There's nothing more traumatizing than you're eating a nice little basket of berries and they're all geschmack, and then all of a sudden you get the sour one. Yeah, absolutely.
Right, that's a meltdown.
But I just want to pause there for a second. I don't think we're exaggerating by one hair's breadth to say, think about someone for whom an unexpected sour blueberry is terrifying. It's like someone snuck up behind you and started like sounding an air horn in the back of your ear. It's terrifying, and it causes intense just fright and stress in the body. So if you could imagine someone who's having experiences like that unbeknownst to you throughout the day, just that alone should increase the compassion. But I'm sorry for the interruption, but you were in the middle of the blueberries.
Thank you. No, so we see this all the time. Difficulty with sleep. I have a child who didn't sleep through the night till he was 8.5, and he slept through the night during Corona. When he was home for a prolonged period of time and he had total control over what he was being asked to do, then he slept through the night, right? One of the brachos of Corona. But it's very normal for kids to struggle with sleep, with eating, again, with time and time management. These things are all very normal. From a spiritual perspective, because they're big neshamos in small bodies, it's uncomfortable. From a physical perspective, because adrenaline and cortisol limit our ability to eat and to sleep in the most basic ways.
It's interesting what you mentioned, Dr. Bass, about you didn't call it a vicious cycle, but it is a vicious cycle. I think it's important to highlight this. And that's why, by the way, in case people didn't catch, Rabbi mentioned that we are starting a course, a 6-week course, an online course on this topic. And I think the link is in the chat.
Of enjoying your child. Understanding.
Yes, that's the title.
Yourself all the way to joy.
The goal of the course
by the end, for which we paired up. Yeah. Right.
To enjoy your complex child. So one of the reasons that we teamed up for the course is that, we each bring a different perspective to it, but we each appreciate each other's perspectives on it. So right there is a perfect example of how those two perspectives not only are consistent with each other, but when you put them together, it takes the whole understanding to a whole new level, which is like I was mentioning, this child, from a spiritual perspective, this child is a soul that's uncomfortable in a body. And therefore, things that bodies have to deal with are very foreign and uncomfortable, such as eating. So then Dr. Bass comments, think about it just on a psychological level or on a physiological level, on more pasha begashmias. When you are living like that, so then you're in the fight or flight. You're inundated with all of these chemicals that Hashem created to keep us safe when we need to survive. You know, the adrenaline, cortisol, and then of course, imagine if you just experienced something, God forbid, really intense, frightening, shocking. You don't have an appetite, right? You lost your appetite. So the vicious cycle of the spiritual condition creates this discomfort with the body and with physicality. And then what happens is you're not taking care of yourself. So you're walking around distressed. Your body is being pushed past its limits, or like Dr. Bass described, that mild headache that's just constantly there. You're flushed with cortisol and adrenaline. And of course you don't want to eat. And then so that you're not eating, and now you're feeling even worse. And your soul is, obviously, a soul is able to integrate with the body based on the body that we eat. This is how Kabbalah explains it. We eat in order to maintain the connection between the soul and the body. So you're not eating, so the soul-body connection is becoming even more detached, and it becomes this vicious cycle. So when you understand how the physical and the spiritual, are interacting with each other, it brings us to a whole new level of understanding, and hopefully a whole new level of empathy for the child. And then hopefully the main goal is a new level of being able to accommodate and help and support the child, so that there's some actual practical changes that might make his life or her life more pleasant.
Right. So I'm gonna bring it down again. So as a parent, when you understand that this is what's going on for your child, the question doesn't become, how do I get the child to eat? The chinuch question becomes, how do I de-stress my child enough so they can eat? Right? So what is it that gets my child in what I call the green zone, right? We all have this sort of green zone where we feel good, where we feel relaxed, where we feel like comfortable in our skin. Then we have a red zone where we're understimulated, and a blue zone where we're overstimulated, and a blue zone where we're understimulated. Our kids spend a lot of time understimulated, and we forget this as adults because we're so overstimulated in most of our day, especially if we have large families. But our kids, particularly these kids who have very interesting minds, spend a lot of their day understimulated, and they'll come home and literally run into walls or siblings to stimulate themselves into their green zone. So if you have a kid who's not eating, very often the question becomes, what's going on with them on a sensory level, on a social emotional level, on a cognitive level? So when they come home, you stick headphones on them with a, audiobook that they like, you stick them in a bean bag, you get them in their zone, and then you kind of throw them a bag of cornflakes, which are really predictable, and all of a sudden your child can eat because you stopped trying to force them into eating, and you started kind of understanding what they need in order to be able to eat.
Amazing. Let's go to the next live question. A lot of live questions over here. Okay, you're on, Aura.
Hi, thank you so much. First of all, thank you to all of you for bringing this together, and for you, Dr. Bass and Rabbi Taub. So my question is like this. Let's say you come to, like, the child's old enough to articulate how they feel, and you are, talking to the child about, like, oh, how can I help you with this and that? And they say something like, and I don't think I'd be the only person to say this, where the kid's like, well, in the moment, I just can't. Like, you do all the practices with them, you give them the tools, you make the safe space, you make the calm down space, you practice the breathing, da 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 da. And they say, but in the moment, I just can't use any of it. I can't think. Are there any other, like, ways to help them besides for medication to, like, help them think in the heat of the moment?
I don't think so well in the heat of the moment, meaning none of us, when we're overwhelmed, think well, right? I think, first of all, there's natural brain development, meaning you're going to see a big jump around age 9 and a big jump around bar and bas mitzvah. As adults, we get overwhelmed less because our capacity to hold the larger picture, like this moment isn't going to last forever, naturally gets better, right? So as our kids are young, we do a lot of co-regulation, a lot of sitting next to them and going like, I know you can't think right now. I'm here. We're going to sit it out, and your brain's going to come back online, and then you're going to be able to think. The most overwhelming thing, I mean, think about like when you're having a mommy meltdown, right? Like when just the world is overwhelming. Not that you have mommy meltdowns, just I do. When the world is overwhelming, you know, it's Erev Pesach, the kids are bananas, whatever, and your husband walks in and he's like, what can I do to help? And you're like, I don't know, I did something, right? Like we don't think so well when we're overwhelmed. That's normal. And I think it's hard to push developmentally. But again, our question is going to be similar to the eating question. What do you know about your child? What do you know you can do with your child, because they get a little paralyzed themselves often, that's going to help them regulate and get back into the green zone? There is a wave of I'm just overwhelmed. The same way we have waves of we're just overwhelmed. They probably just happen less frequently and less intensely because we're adults. Do you want to comment on that, Rabbi Taub, that sort of just wave of overwhelm? I feel like you explained that very well from the inside.
Yeah, I mean, I can only echo what you've just said already, which is that not all times are opportunities for effective communication. And I think we need to have permission to back off and reapproach at a later time. A later time may mean tomorrow. Later time may only be 5 minutes from now. But when a child says, I can't, I tend to believe them. It's not, I won't. It's really, I can't. All right. So if you can't, no problem. There's no point in persisting. All it's going to do is further stress somebody who is in a constant state of stress, which is the opposite of what we're going for. So I think it's a very simple rule, but it's very liberating for parents just to say, it's okay to back away and try it again when it may work. We don't have to resolve it right now. In fact, we can't resolve it. All we can do is exacerbate it and make it more stressful, which is counterproductive.
And I want to say, Laura, the fact that your son can say I can't instead of I won't probably is a lot of good chinuch on your part. The fact that he got to that place of I realize that I'm stuck, because like Rabbi Taub said, a lot of kids push back with like, I don't want to, I don't, you know, like it's this sort of protective mechanism so that they don't have to, it's vulnerable to say, I can't. I remember I asked my child to do something. He must have been like 8 or 9 or something. And I remember he was like, my brain doesn't let. I was like, what does that mean? I didn't even understand. It was such a fascinating comment. And very articulately, he proceeded to explain to me that, like, if I asked him to do something in an angry voice, he absolutely couldn't do it. Like, it was such a fascinating moment in my parenting experience. And it sounds like you have a child who's very insightful about his limits to be able to say when you're overwhelmed, I can't think right now, really is where we're aiming a lot.
What do
Yeah.
you do though when the I can't think is some like meaning with the like, okay, so let's say you could just back off and like let them be in that space that they can't think, but when the behaviors in that space are like literally damaging, like hurting people or breaking stuff, how do you like Rabbi Taub and you were saying, you know, so believe them and it's true, like definitely believe them. They can't, but like they also can't be allowed to like, you know, just hurt their siblings because they're angry or whatever else that is the reaction in those moments. So how do you allow like how do you wait it out if the
You
behavior
said it totally beautifully. I get it. You can't think right now. I can't let you hurt people right now. Right? We have 3 options. I can go with you to another room. I can take people out of this room, or I can, you know, call for backup or whatever it is. But you know, he has his limits and you have your limits, which is that you're the adult who sees the broader picture. He's gone into like a fight, flight, or freeze, narrow focus kind of reaction to his overstimulation. So that's where you want to get to as a parent, where you can like, you've worked through all the complicatedness in your head so that you can just go, I totally get it that you can't think right now. I can't let you hurt people. So this is what I'm going to do. And they may freak out, but you're in that place as a parent of total clarity of like, I love you. I totally get what's going on with you. I totally get what the family needs. I have a plan. I'm going to put it into action. And I'm not afraid that you may have a really big emotion about that.
I think that's the question. What does a parent have to do to maintain that clarity that you're talking? Because many times in the moment, it brings up all the triggers and we lose it. As a parent, it's very hard, even for regular chinuch. And like you're saying, you're the adult and you have to be the one with clarity and calm, but it's not possible. What could we do?
Rabbi Taub, you want to field that one first? You want me
I
to
mean,
go
there are
on
a
it?
lot of answers. I can give you one answer, which is dibuk chavedim, just having chevra. When you have a community and you're reminded that you're not in this alone, you can sort of get a reality check to create a way of normalizing things that are not normal for other people. What I mean by that is that if you're the only one doing it, sometimes it just, in a moment of weakness, you revert to what you want, what you wish would work, even though you know intellectually it's not going to work. But if you have that support system where you've heard enough stories from enough people and there's a consistent pattern to it and sort of been there, done that, then you can check yourself and be like, okay, you know what? There's nothing going to be gained by trying to strong arm this situation. So just one thing that I would highly recommend for parents in this situation is have at least a few friends and check in with them, not because you had a particularly stressful day, but just check in with them all the time. In other words, preemptively before the high stress situation comes up, so that you can have that moment of sort of self-awareness and be like, okay, right. This is a normal, I mean, relatively speaking, for this kind of situation, this is a normal type of conflict to be in. I know the response. It's not to push through it. It's not to strong arm it. And again, when you think you're the only one doing it, in a moment of weakness, it's very easy to revert to what you wish would work. But when you know that there are other people who are also on this journey, it helps humble you. And in that second, if you can wait a second before you act, in that second you can recalibrate and do something more rational instead of emotional. That's just one answer, but there are many answers.
Yeah, I think there's the deep personal work in yourself, right? Sometimes our kids trigger just our childhood protective mechanisms, right? Whatever you did in your family of origin when there was conflict or things got chaotic, worked for you as a child, and it's probably not going to work for you as an adult because you're the one who's responsible, right? If you fought or fled or froze as a kid, so you weren't ultimately responsible for the family, but those things aren't going to work with your own child. Um, so there's that deep work. But I think, like Rabbi Taub said, I run several online communities for parents of differently wired kids, and one of the things the moms often say is like, I'm so much more able to hold it together since I joined this group. And it's not because of my, phenomenal coaching ability. It's because that isolation piece is so stressful, and we don't realize how much stress we're carrying when it feels like I don't have any friends who are going through the same thing. I can't just reach out to my neighbor because I'm embarrassed, or I feel like she thinks my kid's a tzaddikel. I don't want to like ruin her impression of him. So when you kind of come onto, an online forum and there's a bunch of moms going through the same thing, and you go like, my kid just kicked a hole in my drywall. Anyone know how to fix drywall? Like, it's very relieving. And another mother walks in and kind of goes, onto the online forum and kind of goes like, yeah, my kid actually kicked a hole in the drywall that looked like a heart. And I took a picture of it because maybe one day it'll be the cover of my autobiography. It's very containing and helpful, and helps you kind of stay in a mindset of like, this isn't about me. I mean, it is about me because Hashem sent it to me, but it's not my fault in any way. So I think that having support, emotional support for you, and more support in your household. I think I want to get into the topic of burnout. I think a lot of our kids, especially as they hit teenagehood, can burn out. It can look a lot like depression, and they share that experience with us. A lot of mothers deal with a very intense kind of burnout when their child hits the point where their coping mechanisms are not as good as or not as high as the stress that's being put upon them. When our kids really kind of fall apart, a lot of parents burn out, and having enough support in your household, literally babysitting and household support, so that you can help your child hold that stress without falling apart yourself, I think is essential.
Amazing. Okay, let's go to the next live question. Mrs. Blocken, you're on.
A couple of questions, and I want to preface with the fact that I actually work as an occupational therapist for early intervention, so I see a lot of that in my own work, obviously. But I would love for you to be able to expound on what happens when there is ADHD, ADD, or even, defiance, oppositional defiance when it comes to the children, because there's a lot of comorbidity that comes with that, not just simply the sensory dysfunction that they have, but also additional things that combine and make the experience much more complex. And I also would like you to please address how is it that cortisol affects those children, because I see that many of my moms are very nervous, and I find that the excess of cortisol that during pregnancy these children experience seems to be very much part of what later on happens to these kids.
All right, so I'll start off with that one, and then I'll ask you, Rabbi Taub. So one thing is I want to zoom out beyond the diagnostic categories, because my own experience is that when I get stuck in a diagnostic category, I lose a little bit of my curiosity. And I find it also with parents and with individuals. I've worked with a lot of like emerging adults over the years, and there is something too static about like I have ADHD, or I have high functioning autism, or I have, oppositional defiant disorder, that feels like we found the answer, right? Like the broken knee, as opposed to like, I am differently wired, and I'm in an emerging process of figuring out what that means for me, for my child, for my family, for where I fit into my community, for what my tafkid is in the world. And so I think as professionals, when we look at like, there's comorbidity here between anxiety and ADHD, we see them as like two separate categories that are happening at the same time, as opposed to here's a child with attentional struggles who's feeling a lot of anxiety. How does that fit together into one whole person rather than comorbid diagnoses, right? It's not this child has a knee issue and a nose issue. It's more like a knee and a hip. There's got to be something that's cycling there, right? So these diagnostic categories are helpful. They came to us, from a bunch of well-meaning psychiatrists in the 1940s, 50s, I don't remember, who sat together to make a DSM so that they knew that people, in Kansas who were talking about someone with mania were seeing the same thing as people in New York. They wanted to be able to discuss things and have like short code. They wanted to create best practices. They were created so people could get services and effective intervention. And they have the unintentional side effect of, I think, making us less curious, like as if we really understand this person because we understand the label. And as a professional, you see one person with ADHD, you see one person with ADHD. It can look completely different in the next child. And I don't want to create also like correlational, I don't want to say correlation equals causation, right? Maybe the mom had more cortisol in her pregnancy because the pregnancy was harder, because her child was already struggling with their neshama being put into a goof. I don't know. Maybe the mom's differently wired herself, because these things obviously run in families, and pregnancy and that experience of her own body created a lot of cortisol. Is there a correlation there? Probably. But I don't want parents to feel like, oh gosh, because I was anxious in pregnancy, now my child has ADHD. I was very anxious in pregnancy, and I have kids who don't have ADHD, right? So we don't know, but I think that place of, as professionals, periodically zooming out and going like, wait, did I get stuck in the diagnostic categories? Even though all day I tell parents not to do that, because it happens. It happens. We see a kid coming in and they're on the intake form is these 4 diagnoses, and we think we know what that means. And then we can meet a kid who we go, you know what? They don't even meet these diagnostic categories. They did when they were 4 and they got these diagnoses, right? Because they were presenting in a particular way to that particular person. And I think that's what makes our kids so complex, is that they can present one way to one evaluator and a totally different way to a different evaluator. One of my colleagues in graduate school was an autism specialist, and she did her dissertation on how differently kids present with when they use different tests to, for autism, and ones with more, colors that are of more interest. So the high functioning kids don't get diagnosed because when they're interested in what they're doing, they don't get stressed out or present as autistic, right? And so actually, the better the evaluator is, the more they get autism, the more personable they are, the more they can connect, and the more interesting the evaluation is, the less likely the kid is to get a high functioning diagnosis. So, I mean, then there are people who are like the next tier up who are so nuanced that they will get it, but that's sort of the way that I see it. Is that helpful? Did that answer your question?
I just wanted one more point that I want to ask you then. Co-regulation, is that something that you endorse? Is that something that you help them understand? Co-regulation, massaging, how do you help the parents then understand what tools they need to be able to help their child, since it's so very specific?
I'm not sure what the first question is about correlation.
No,
Oh,
co-regulation.
co-regulation, I misheard. How do I help parents understand, or how do I help the kid understand?
Either or both.
Co-regulation. So I often explain it to parents as like, I do this hand model of, we have like our reptilian brain, right? We've got, this is Dan Siegel's model. We've got the part in our brain that is in charge of fight, flight, or freeze. Then we've got our mammalian brain, which is in charge of the social stuff, keeping track of the herd. We've got our amygdala, and we've got kind of our human brain. And anything that triggers the amygdala, right, that is perceived or real danger, sets us down here. So I describe co-regulation as like when someone goes down here, it's a little contagious. So when our kid goes into fight, flight, or freeze because their amygdala got triggered, we often go right down there with them, right? You can call it mirror neurons, you can call it vibes, call it whatever you want, but it is a real exercise. I say like Olympic swimmers need coaches, like we are Olympic parents, we need coaches. It really requires some coaching to know how to stay here when your child really goes into fight, flight, or freeze. And that's how I describe just, co-regulation, is that you need to stay here so that your child feels safe enough and can come back online. So that's how I describe co-regulation. Whether or not massage is helpful for your child, what's helpful for your child. Massage, I tend to find as more of a preventative skill. No one wants to be touched when they're dysregulated. It's overwhelming. But that's often how I describe dysregulation and co-regulation. Rabbi Taub, you want to add anything?
No. I mean, very briefly, just a comment about something you were talking about, these diagnostic terms, the convenience of them, that they take a bunch of different qualities that may be that may be sort of, for convenience sake, used. You can use a label, a word, 2 words. I think just from a Jewish perspective, we have to remember one thing. First of all, the fact that Hashem has chosen to put our souls in bodies at this time in history when this knowledge exists in the world is fantastic. And because the knowledge exists, we should use it. At the same time, please remember, these are just words. They're not Torah Misinai. We have tools that are literally Torah Misinai, not figuratively. And so just remember, the language, especially the diagnostic terms, to the extent that they are convenient, they help to communicate a bunch of ideas in a short amount of time, or more importantly, and Dr. Bass mentioned this very quickly, but when they can be used to procure services, then those terms are useful. But we shouldn't sanctify these words, and certainly we shouldn't feel limited by the words or limit our children to these words. It can even become dehumanizing, where the person becomes a diagnosis. They become the condition. So the words are great tools. They're tools. And tools are useful in as much as they perform a task. But yeah, I think there's a danger in becoming really subservient to the language, to the clinical language. And, again, it's wonderful that this knowledge exists today. It makes it so we don't have to reinvent the wheel each and every time. We can use one word and everyone will understand a whole list of issues that we're referring to. But yeah, let's make sure let's use the words and not allow the words to use us.
Beautiful. The other thing I'll say is I think the diagnostic categories, they help get services, and they can help you find resources, right? If your child gets an ADHD diagnosis and you read a book on ADHD, you're much closer to understanding your child. It will give you some language. Some of it will resonate, some of it won't resonate. I think in the last decade, a lot of self-advocates have come out, and it's a fascinating literature. But the whole world of ADHD, people with ADHD aren't going like, attention deficit disorder? I don't have a deficit of attention. I have a hyperabundance of attention. I just can't focus it, right? So I think as you read self-advocates, people high functioning on the autism spectrum are often very, very articulate about their experiences. I think in the last 5 years, this awesome thing happened with oppositional defiant disorder, where a bunch of people came out and they were like, you know what? I identify more with PDA, with pathological demand avoidance, which they've sort of renamed persistent demand for autonomy. A lot of people who are kind of high functioning on spectrum feel like when someone puts a demand on me, I get anxious and I freeze. And I'm not being defiant. I'm actually terrified. And so I say no hyper reactively. And I think that opened up a whole world for professionals who were like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. So the diagnoses themselves, as people who have them, when I was growing up, these terms were like, no one really knew what they meant. It wasn't like 10 kids in the class had them. As people who were diagnosed, in the 90s are coming of age, they're starting to share their experience. And I think it's very helpful to parents. That said, it depends who you read. There's a lot of misinformation out there. But I think even the diagnostic categories themselves, people are kind of illuminating in a way that I think is very helpful often as parents in terms of my understanding of my child.
Do you think that the children today are more anxious than other generations before them? And why?
I wasn't alive in other generations, so I don't know.
Oh, their parents,
If
your
they
parents, their
are, they
grandparents.
earned it fairly.
Questions, a
There's
lot
like
of
literally planes flying above my head in Israel right now. I can hear them.
I just have a lot of questions. Let's move to the next question.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, you're on.
I want to thank Dr. Bass so much. I really so deeply appreciated and enjoyed the summit the other week, and I signed up for her course together with Rabbi Taub this week. I'm so tremendously grateful for the work that you are doing. For my question, which is a bit involved, is more context better, or should I just go straight to my question?
Why don't you go to the question, and then Rabbi Taub and I will ask if we feel like we need more details.
Okay, so the question is basically, do you feel that there's a time where it becomes appropriate if there's extended family that does not acknowledge a child's neurodivergency, that there's a point where we say that this person is not necessarily good or safe for my child to be around?
I'll start, and then Rabbi Taub, you can chime in. There's absolutely a point meaning if someone is outright physically, emotionally, or otherwise abusive to your child, whether they're neurodivergent or not, there's always a line that can be crossed where you as a parent have to say this isn't safe. It's the hardest when it's emotional kind of abuse and verbal kind of abuse, because that's when someone hits your child, it's like bolette, it's more in your face. What I will say is I have a lot of compassion for people who don't get it, right? The shalom bias stuff that comes up when you have a child with hidden differences, the dynamics in the family that come up when you have a child with hidden differences are so normal. The differences don't come from nowhere. They trigger people in the family who are similarly wired. They can bring up a lot of guilt or shame in the parent who feels like the child inherited their struggles from them, which is, of course, part of the process. It's not your fault. I think very often in the beginning of the process, when our child's melting down and we have family members that are critical, we can jump into like mama bear mode and want to protect our child completely from that person. So I just challenge you to really look at the other person with compassion and ask, are they really in the category of they are dangerous for this child or for me to be around? Or is there a conversation that I could have and it might take time and it might be painful or embarrassing for me because it's for sure going to get met with resistance at first? And then make the choice
So
from there.
then,
What I'll say is, if you really get to the place where you go, this is a person who's not able to, at this point, show up in the relationship the way I want to show up in, for you, there will be a very big experience of like grieving or mourning or anger when you look at a family member who you want to be able to support you, and instead they're just so involved in their own stuff that they can't. It is painful for you. It's a vulnerable act, right? The immediate experience might be anger because it has to create that boundary, but you want to be real with yourself and also be in touch with that vulnerable feeling of pain that's right under there.
right. So then how do you even attempt to, I guess, quantify the amount, like you're saying, if this other person is dangerous to my child or to myself, how do you quantify the trauma that the projected future trauma of the masking and the invalidation and all of that stuff that is going to come along with regularly interacting with somebody who goes, your kid doesn't have ADHD, you're just a bad parent.
Right.
Right.
I wish there was an app for that, right?
Right.
I
Well,
just scan this person. Oh, she's a 7.4 and the line is a 7. I can't tell you. What I can tell you is you don't have to project the future. You can stick with it now. There's a very valuable learning experience for your child as they get older. Our children are not going to be understood by the whole world. There is going to become a point, but it's more like around bar bat mitzvah, where you're going to help your child self-advocate, where you're going to help them kind of live with, not everyone gets you. And these are the words and these are the things you can do to help other people get you. But you're going to have to help them live in a world where people don't always get it. They may be too young for that now. You may be too burned out to deal with it right now. But what I will say is you don't have to project it forward. You can ask right now, can my nervous system handle this? Can my child's nervous system handle this? Are we walking ourselves, 100 miles an hour towards a brick wall of dysregulation and family conflict and things that I can't handle right now?
thank you.
Rabbi Taub, do you want to chime in on that?
Just about the self-advocacy part, just wanted to, actually two things you said I want to sort of make sure people got. Self-advocacy is a huge thing, and it's not just about dealing with relatives, it's about dealing with the world. And you have to be able to read your child as far as their readiness, but teaching them that there are people who are not going to accommodate and people are not going to want to accommodate. They don't want to understand you. maybe even they have an agenda. Dafka, they don't want to understand you. And that is a skill that the child should learn at some point in the right time, in the right way. The other thing was, I don't know if people caught that, but Dr. Bass made a passing mention about certain family members who may be particularly triggered by the complex child because, lo and behold, these things do tend to run in families. And maybe it is that the person who's getting particularly triggered has a touch of that same condition and feels called out, even witnessing it in that child. I've seen that many times where a parent will get their own late diagnosis and have a real spiritual awakening and just a life-changing experience, just sort of realizing, oh, you know what? That thing that my kid is doing that's making me so inordinately upset. Like my spouse is also upset, but like in sort of like the way you would expect, that she's stressed out because the kid is difficult to deal with. But why am I taking it so personally? Maybe like the Baal Shem Tov said, "Ayid is a spiegel." That when you see something in someone else, it's a reflection. And I think that's something. Obviously, I'm not saying going around at the next family wedding and telling your second cousin get a diagnosis. I'm saying more in the immediate family. Really, I'm speaking about parents. That if parents think maybe they're spotting something in their kid that's reminding them of their own struggles, which can be extremely painful, by the way. Just okay. I'm sorry. I thought this was going to be a quick thing, but okay. Let's say somebody is high functioning, and meaning to say they've gotten away with it. They've perfected the mask, that's the term for it, and they do it really well. Now, it's not without a cost because masking all the time is exhausting. So you have a parent who's masking really well, who's really spread thin because of the constant need to mask. And now not only they have the added stress of having this complex child, but they have the added stress of seeing the very thing that they've been trying to cover up being shoved in their face. And that can be humiliating in a very unique way. Just like, this is our shame, this is our secret, and you're putting it out there. And it could be completely subconscious on the parent's part. I've seen it many times where when the parent realizes that they have it too, there's such an opportunity not only for empathy toward the child, which is obviously important, but empathy toward oneself. Like, there are core parts of my identity that I've been denying my entire life, and I would have continued this way for the rest of my life, except raising this child has forced me to come to terms with certain aspects of myself. So I think that's also a really interesting part of this whole discussion, which is the personal journey that parents go through, not just in becoming better parents for their children, but self-discovery that kind of concurrently goes on as well in certain cases.
So I'm sitting here and I'm laughing because the relative in question was an adult diagnosed sibling of mine. So there you go.
There you go.
There you go.
If you spot it if you got it. If you
right, exactly.
you got it. Yeah.
Yeah. What's unfortunate is that my child who wishes that they had, a trusted adult who has been through this that they could go to for support doesn't, because the relative in question doesn't believe that the child has the diagnosis.
Right. Can't afford it.
Right. So it's definitely very, very difficult.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
But there's an exercise that I had a supervisor used to ask me to do this all the time, and I do it with people that I supervise, is she taught me to sit in the chair where my client sits, take on their posture, and ask myself, what's it like for you to sit in this chair? And the first time I did it, I remember it being a very powerful experience. Hold on. Can you guys hear me? Something just popped up on the Zoom that
Yeah,
says,
yeah, we hear you.
Yeah.
I might challenge you to, just for some compassion, kind of explore what this might be like for your family member to, like Rabbi Taub says, this sibling of yours probably sits around all day telling himself not to be weird, or herself, like with a lot of negative self-talk in their own head. And then when your child does the things that they would like to do, all those protectors that keep that inside, they just come out towards your child. So I hear as a mother your wish that this person could show up compassionately for your child. So I'm challenging you a little bit to show up compassionately for this family member. It doesn't mean you don't have to make boundaries with them. But life is long and people change, and it may turn into that relationship and it may not. But again, your own sort of holding of your deep emotions about the fact that that family member can't right now, right? The experience is that they won't, but it probably the deeper understanding is that they can't right now show up for your child in the way you wish.
Thank you.
Here's a question. The question is, what do we do, whether it's a teacher, Rabbi, in the classroom? How do we speak to when it's just too hard? Somebody sent in something that's happening now. What do I answer to my son in 8th grade when he asks me, why am I not in a misifta? And what do we tell the whether it's, it's part of a system, the Rosh Hashivas, how do we talk to them in a way that they should understand, or it's too much for them? They're running this company. It's just hard to have that extra, the extra help that they need. And they put in so much koiches. The child should be in the regular system, all the years, and now when it comes to Masifta, it's just like. So what do we say? What do we do?
Menachem, just to clarify, you're asking how to explain this to the system, meaning schools, educators.
Number one, and is it something that we can, maybe they can't. Maybe you have a classroom with 30 kids, and this child is just a little bit harder. You have to have someone, maybe a shadow or something.
Well, I'll give you a very short answer, and then rely on Dr. Bass to give you the correct answer. Short answer is just not to be medayik in your words, but there's a difference between explaining things and then actually having them grant accommodation. In other words, there are two different things. One is, I just want you to hear me. I want you to understand. He's not a bad kid. And don't just nod and say, yeah, I know. I actually need you to understand that. I mean, it's an important distinction. Now, that's level one. Level two is, here are the accommodations that would be helpful. Now, they don't have to grant those accommodations. They could tell you we're not in a position to do that. Okay, then comes the question of how much to fight. I'm a big advocate for parents being fighters for their kid, whether the kid has, whether it's a complex kid or any type of kid. I say parents should always fight fiercely for their kids. But what I'm saying is there's being able to explain it, and then there's being able to ask for accommodation. They're both important. I think they're both very important, but they're two separate things. So that's my short answer.
Mm-hmm. And then we have to know what to tell the 13-year-old.
And what to tell the child, yeah.
That he shouldn't be broken.
Right.
Well,
Dr. Bass, do you want to add to this?
Yeah. Rabbi Taub, do you mind if I tell the story of the first time I asked you to speak for the summit?
Go ahead. Yeah, sure. Why not?
Okay, so I'm going to tell
friends. Just a few hundred people here.
So the first time I asked Rabbi Taub to speak on one of these summits, I found his contact information and I said, I'm creating a summit. I want to kind of end the isolation for parents of kids with hidden differences. And he wrote back and he said very articulately, I would love to do this. If I schedule it, it's going to take up my whole day. I'm going to be thinking about it. If you WhatsApp me and say, can you get on a call right now? Then I can get on a call right now. It doesn't ruin my day. Just be persistent with me. I said, great, fantastic, fantastic self-advocate, right? He goes, this is how my brain works. I can, in a socially appropriate way, say, I want to do this thing for you. This is what I need, in a way I could totally hear. And so I WhatsApped him a couple of times until at some weird hour of the day, he was like hopped on and was extraordinarily articulate about what I needed him to be articulate about, right? He explained this whole beautiful thing about how some souls are inherently uncomfortable in bodies, and the response I got from parents was amazing. Now, he would have had to charge me thousands of dollars if I was going to take up his whole day. But because he could advocate for himself, what we could create in the world had tremendous impact. So what we want to get our kids to be able to do, now why could Rabbi Taub do that, right? First of all, he's a grown man. It took him a while to get there. He expressed that to me. That wasn't something he could always do. But he also believes in his kohos and wanted to be able to help and serve people in this way. So one is our kids have to really know what their kohos are. If you come into a 13-year-old and you go, you're differently wired, your brain doesn't do this and it doesn't do this and it doesn't do this, devastating. Don't tell me at 13 all the things that I can't do. First of all, I already know. I'm 13, right? And I'm a little hyper-focused on everything that's awkward about me. But I have to know my strengths, right? When you sit down with a kid and you're like, listen, you build amazing models, you're an engineering brain, you have these amazing kohos, you fix all the things in our house, you built the neighbor's sukkah, these are your kohos. And you don't like to read and write. So we're going to have to find some program for you that builds on your kohos and doesn't frustrate you. I don't want to stick you in a situation where every single day you're just going to be like having to do all the things they don't want to do. Mostly from a 13-year-old, you're going to get, I also don't want to be in a program where I'm going to have to do all the stuff I don't want to do. I would rather be in some kind of alternative program. So number one is you have to know your child's strengths. They have to know their strengths. They have to have ample time in their day, which is so hard with the Bacharim, where they're in their strengths. Because then when you kind of go like, and we know that you don't like doing these things, zorem, like it flows. It's just kind of a continuation of what we already know about you. We see you, we hear you, we're helping you advocate for yourself. That's a kid who's going to show up at an interview to some kind of, educational program and go, I know myself and I want to be in a place where I can shine, as opposed to the kid who shows up and kind of looks nebby and nervous and like, I'm going to the Nebuch program. So that's how I would go about it. But we talk a lot about just how brains work in our family, how my brain works, how my husband's brain works, how each of the kids' brains work. Like this is a Shabbos table conversation. So all of my kids, without complex diagnostic terms, know what they do well and what they don't do well in a way where there's not any kind of shame about it. Because I want them to become adults like Rabbi Taub, who can just say like, this is how my brain works in a totally socially appropriate way, like take it or leave it. I can't really change it, and I wouldn't even try because I can advocate for myself now.
Wow, this is something we should implement, I think, into the world. We should talk about, before
Self-advocacy?
Any relationship, say, this is how my brain works. Tell me about your brain.
By the way,
in
Coach
marriage, for
Menachem,
sure, right?
Chazal tell us that no two brains work the same. Just like no two people have the same face, no two people have the same brain. So when somebody is neurodivergent, then it's more obvious that the way their brain is wired is not the way that society is set up to function. So it's more, I guess I'd call it urgent for them to learn the skill of self-advocacy. But Coach Menachem, you're 100% right, because every one of us has a different brain than every other one of us. Self-advocacy really should be part of the sprach in any interpersonal relationship.
Amazing.
And that's something that we can learn from parenting complex kids. it's a skill that you can then apply in the rest of your life.
And I'll say, I think a lot of parents in my groups, it's a real learned skill. I don't know if it's just something Hashem does or it's sort of by the nature of who would join an online group. I think a lot of adult women have a kind of good girl thing, perfectionist thing. We somehow picked up that it's not polite to advocate for ourselves or our children, and it is definitely part of the process to be able, again, in socially appropriate ways, in ways that other people can hear us, to learn how to advocate for our children, for ourselves, to get the support that we need in a way that other people can hear.
Okay, let's go to, we have quite a few more live questions. I want to try to cover them. Okay, you're on.
Yes, first I want to thank Rabbi Taub for bringing this subject to the forefront because it's been a very lonely journey before you started talking about it on your Instagrams. And it's been a very useful tool to have someone who understands this. So yeah, so thank you for that. The second thing I wanted to say, I got a little detracted from Coach Menachem. I'd love to know where these yeshivas are that are going to be oasis heavens for our neurodivergent children. I will say this, our kids are going to come back into the system and our kids are going to fix it. And they're going to be at the forefront of creating yeshivas with a safe space to let them know that Torah is something that's attainable to them and that they have every right to be Yorish the Torah like anybody else, and they just need the proper environment to do it. I'm thankful that my son had Waterbury. It was a bracha beyond belief, but that's not really why I wanted to ask a question. I wanted to know how we can help transition the older child that's now going into adulthood, that's no longer under our roof, to create the environment that they've needed. I guess the answer is going to be self-advocacy, but aside from that, is there anything we can do to support the child who's now entering shidduchim or becoming an adult, needing to live on their own, going into a foreign environment, and how they can create that safe space, develop relationships where they don't have the same kind of control over their Dalet Amos?
I think you just touched the third rail when you said the word shidduchim, and I'm glad that you did. I was in touch with a mother who was telling me maybe about a year or two ago about her son in his early 20s, very sweet boy, a good learner, spiritual, like really from like real Yiras Shamayim, all the milas, and high masking autistic, diagnosed since he was a kid, went through the regular system, but definitely autistic. And she asked me about shidduchim. And I told her that there's such heartbreak in a neurodiverse marriage. Neurodiverse meaning you have a neurotypical and a neurodivergent person coming together. It's hard enough to have ish v'isha trying to live in the same house, but then you have two people whose brains are totally differently wired. And there are so many opportunities for the autistic husband to be misunderstood as lacking empathy, when in truth, he's really in tune with his wife's emotions, just expresses it and experiences it in a language that's foreign to her, and other issues that just create serious shalom bias issues. And,
are we looking for same?
And I said, hello?
I just want to ask Rabbi Taub, are we looking for same or are we looking for
hold on. Let me get back to this. I'm telling a story. So I told this mother, I said, it would be an incredible disservice to your son if he were to do what I know he can do, which is turn on his best normal mask through the dating process and successfully marry a girl who will not be able to understand his unmasked self. And he will be signed up for 50 years of having to mask or risk completely alienating his wife. And that is a living hell. So she said to me, I agree with you. There's only one problem. He doesn't want to identify that way, and he doesn't want to share this information. So I said, I respect that, and that's certainly his choice. I suggested you should take the remaining time you have to try to explain to him that there not only is there no shame in this, but that the greatest likelihood for success in a marriage will be if he can be his authentic self and communicate his authentic self. Now, to answer your question, does that mean that the girl also has to be neurodivergent? No, I'm not saying that. But what it does mean is it's not going to work if he has to get her to accept him while he is putting on a version of himself that is unsustainable or will lead to a mental breakdown if he attempts to sustain it. So last week, I got a WhatsApp that this boy is engaged and that the girl understands the situation and thinks he's wonderful. She knows who he is, his authentic self. He can be himself, and she absolutely adores him. So I was so happy to hear that. To answer your specific question, I know it's considered like literal, like suicide to mention these words. I know the stigma is so thick and heavy, but I cannot adequately convey to you the mental and emotional torture that you'll put somebody through, especially someone who's high masking, to push them through shidduchim, where they will be in a situation where they will literally not be able to reveal their true self for their entire life, or if at one moment they slip and they do reveal their true self, meaning the way they think differently, they respond differently, they process stimuli differently, and that's their own spouse who's supposed to support them sees that as bizarre and doesn't know what to do with that. Like, you're setting somebody up for such misery. So as scary as it is to be honest about these things, I think we should be more scared of not being honest about it. And I want to tell you something. There are plenty of families who know exactly what this is because they also have children like this. And again, your question, does it have to be neurodivergent with neurodivergent? No, I'm not saying that it does. But even if a neurodivergent person marries a neurotypical person, the neurotypical person has to understand what they're getting into. And the more clear we can be, the more honest we can be, the more likelihood of success there will be. That's my very strong opinion on the topic.
So I'm going to add just one dimension, which is that very often if a child has had a diagnosis since they were young, they received a lot of services, they know themselves pretty well, and there becomes this question of, do they identify with it as adults, right? To get a high-functioning autistic diagnosis, you have to have some kind of perseverative interest, something you get very, very, very into and have a hard time getting out of. You have to have some kind of social communication difficulty, and you have to have very intense sensory experiences, right? So it's very frequent that somebody who is diagnosed as a child, by the time they're an adult, they can manage their sensory sensitivities. They've created a good fit life. If the thing that their perseverative interest happens to be Torah, then they fit right in. Right? So it happens frequently that a child who is diagnosed young, when they look at these things as adults, they go, you know, maybe it's a perseverative interest, but it meets a social norm. I don't love crowds, but I have a couple of close friends who really know me. And yeah, I have sensory sensitivities. I carry around the earplugs. I don't go to Minion where there's a million people around, but I don't identify with that to the point where I feel like I qualify for a diagnosis anymore. And again, if we're in that medical model, right, we go like, wait, could a person become not autistic? Their brain wiring is the same, but as an adult, because they were identified so young, they created a good fit life so that their environment almost never pushes them over the edge. So I think it's frequent with young adults that they'll go like, listen, with ADHD, you're in the normal shidduch pool. Certainly in Eretz Israel, if you say high functioning autistic, you don't go into the regular shidduch pool anymore. And that is a limitation, and many young people will go like, I don't even really identify with it. Why would I put myself in a different dating pool? But like Rabbi Taub said, at some point during the dating, to say, this is a diagnosis I got as a child. This is what I still identify with. This is what I don't identify with. We hope that our young adult has gotten to that point so they can be articulate about it, and so that their spouse feels like they came in with eyes wide open. When I work with couples where one is neurodivergent and one is neurotypical, when I ask the neurotypical spouse, like, what drew you to your spouse, they almost always use these words of like, there was something so special about them. They were a higher neshama. They were super idealistic. I was looking for more out of life, and this person had this depth and this clarity about what life was all about. So it's you want that person who wants more out of life and who looks at this person and goes like, yeah, it's quirky, but I wasn't so attached to normal to begin with. In fact, I found it kind of boring. So those people are out there, and I've kind of been through that with a lot of neurodivergent young adults. Is that question of like, what do I do with this diagnosis that I'm not attached to?
And I want to repeat something I said earlier. These words are tools that we should use. The words shouldn't use us. So we don't have to worship these words. We don't have to use them in a rigid way. But to the extent that they're useful, if I can save time having to tell you my whole story, and the words will communicate to you my story more rapidly, then we use the words. Now, if the words confuse people, then that's the opposite of a useful tool. But in the context of shidduchim, what I would say is that if a person wants to share their experience, their unique experience, and everyone has a unique experience, and they find it useful to use diagnostic terms to try to communicate that, that's the person's option to do so, to use those terms. But if they don't want to use the terms, they don't want to use those words, I believe they have an obligation not only to the other person, but primarily to themselves and their own future happiness, to find another way to convey it. Okay, the words might save us time, but if you're afraid the words are going to confuse people and you don't want to use the words, fine, but then you have to find other words. You may have to sit down and say to somebody, okay, so here's the deal. I'm not, we're going to get married. I'm not going to take our kids to a rowdy shul on Simchas Torah because hakafas are overwhelming and they make me have a meltdown. I had such a letter, by the way, in the Ami column when I used to write the column. Some guy wrote in and said that since he was a kid, he could not stand Simchas Torah, and now he's a father, and his wife expects him to take the kids, and he's like, I can't deal with it. And we spoke about how he could self-advocate, but that's a sort of thing where he's already married for years and having to suddenly spring this on his wife. And she doesn't even where does this even come from? Where does she fit this into? Whereas imagine if that were something that was understood as, before they even got married.
Listen, we never know what mental health challenges our spouse is going to, right? A very typical person with no mental health history can have postpartum depression, can have, we never know how marriage is going to trigger all kinds of things for all kinds of people. Many people who are high functioning on the spectrum become fantastic parents. Is there an additional struggle there? Does it need more support? Absolutely. And I think, part of this course that I've created with Rabbi Taub is that we want to help parents help their kids come into adulthood with like knowing the supports I need, right? That same way that Rabbi Taub was able to say, like, this is how my brain works. I want to do this thing for you, but I don't want to push myself into overdrive or stress so we want to set our kids up for their best fit life. And I think the scenario you're describing, Bracha, is someone who's not necessarily in that like reciprocal relationship with their own needs, right? If someone goes, wow, the demands of parenthood are triggering me in these ways, I'm a good problem solver, I know myself, how can I meet those needs so I can show up in a way that is respectful and supportive to my spouse, that is available for my children? That's where we want to get our kids, where they go, I know I have more needs. I also know I have more strengths. I don't go into shame because I have more needs. I simply look at them as an is, and I problem solve with them. My wife is not happy is a problem. I can solve that. I don't have to shut down, right? Can I solve it? Not like it's that simple. My child has a need to go to Simchas Torah, and I have sensory needs. What can I do? I want my child to move towards problems in life rather than feel like they need to turtle from them. So it is something that does happen and can happen. I'm kind of like in the upstream, right before the people fall in the water. What can we do back here in early childhood, mid-childhood, and adolescence so their kids come into early adulthood with whatever struggles they're going to have in marriage, in parenthood, in making parnasa. I want our neurodivergent kids to come into the world with, I'm someone with extraordinary kohos. I am somebody who needs more support. I'm somebody who can advocate for myself in socially appropriate ways. And I'm someone who identifies as a problem solver. I have more problems. I solve problems well. Not that all problems are solvable, but I know how to support myself so that I show up in the world in a way that I'm proud of. Rabbi Taub, you want to say anything?
No, I have nothing to add to that. Yeah, I think that's very clear.
Okay, let me just squeeze in one more last question, okay? And then we'll go to the closing. Hi,
Shared here is incredible. As a friend of someone who was struggling with a complex child, very, very complex and very neurodivergent, like the regular things definitely don't work. And I see her struggle with it, and she coaches herself and works through it. She's a conscientious parent, and she, is getting the resources that she can. You had mentioned, Dr. Bass had mentioned before to, for those parents to reach out and get support, and I do try where I can. Is there anything else emotionally or, I don't know, physically, how can I support my friend?
So again, we come up to this self-advocacy thing is where this has gone. It's really hard to support people in places where they don't know they need support.
No, she
right?
definitely knows she needs support though.
Right. So if she knows, you can ask, what's supportive for you? I deeply want to be a supportive friend. Is it, do you need help finding babysitting help? Would it help if I, made double the batch of spaghetti and hot dogs and sent some to you? Is it helpful if I just listen? You can give options, you can ask what she needs. I'm going to say probably the most helpful things when I was really in the thick of it. I had a neighbor who would sometimes take my one really complex child to her for like a Shabbos Suda, just so we could kind of like breathe without being on hypervigilant, because he was really in the wrong school environment, and it was just, he could melt down at any point, and he was a total tzaddik at her house. That was probably the most helpful thing to me. But if she knows she needs support, I would ask, and then it sounds like you're a very dedicated friend. You may just have to tolerate your own discomfort, that you can't save her from this struggle or make it not stressful, right? The same way that our kids go through the world with a certain amount of stress that we hope they learn to manage as they get older. there is an element of stress in this parenting journey that is not in every parenting journey. Some people have high stress jobs, some people have high stress kids. It's just an is. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy a high stress job. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy a high stress kid, but part of it is accepting that I have chosen this high stress job. I have chosen to show up for this high stress kid. I mean, I think sometimes it is hard to watch as a friend, to just kind of go like, this stress is part of my friend's life and I can't do more than I'm doing. I'm just gonna have to watch her be in this high stress period of her life.
Was there, thank you, as a parent of a complex kid, or I'm addressing you, Dr. Bass, was there certain things that people said to you that were specifically unhelpful or hurtful?
I'm sure I could make a list. I'm
I don't know
sure.
if you could give like, just so I make sure that I'm not unintentionally, she does have very good boundaries and she would stand up, but I just proactively, if there's anything that, like, should I not address it at all if she doesn't bring it up? Or it just, if anything comes to mind, if nothing comes to mind,
You
that's
know
fine
what? You
too.
sound very compassionate. I think I would just recommend like a, what do they call it? Like an objection audit. I would just say what you want to say, but maybe say it with like, I'm afraid I'm going to sound not empathic. I'm afraid I'm going to sound like I'm oversimplifying it. I'm afraid I'm going to sound like I'm checking in with you too much, and then just say what you need to say. Like state your fear and then just say what you need to say, right? Sometimes
That's a good idea.
sometimes saying the uncomfortable thing is helpful, right? Sometimes people don't recognize their own burnout and it takes a friend to say the uncomfortable thing. Like, hey, I don't want you to take this as criticism. I haven't heard from you or seen you in months and I'm worried, right? And then your friend kind of goes like, it's been months. Ooh, like sometimes it is a close friend who kind of reflects to you that you have pushed yourself beyond the point. So I wouldn't avoid the discomfort if your friendship is resilient enough. But I might just do the objection audit because it sounds like you're a very empathic person who is already anticipating the things that might happen. So I would just state them and then say what you want to say.
Thank you so much.
Any comments on that, Rabbi Taub?
It's wonderful that people are trying to be supportive, and God willing, the trend will continue. And we should see that as a community, that there's greater sensitivity and desire to be supportive. I think that's where the trend is heading, toward greater empathy and understanding and support. I do think that having the secular terminology, the words that we talked about before, the diagnostic terms, is part of that. Just being able to have that shorthand, that convenient way of referring to these things. But as I was saying before, the main thing is the spiritual component. And what I mean by that in this case, as far as the community and being supportive, probably the most simple spiritual component of it is v'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. And just to understand that we're all different. Some of our ways of being different are not as much at odds with the way that society is set up to function. But some of us, the way that we're wired and the way that we're different, it is very much at odds with the way that things are set up to function. And, just as a thought experiment, imagine if it were suddenly switched and what's considered neurodivergent would now become the norm, and what's neurotypical would become less common, would be considered neurodivergent, then society would be set up differently, right? So a lot of the stress that a neurodivergent person has is simply just because society isn't set up to accommodate the Rive, the majority of people. And it would be nice to see, and I think that we are seeing more of it, and we will see even more of it, that we accommodate more and more these differences. Somebody sent me an email the other day. I had a a reel on social media about how Nadav and Avihu were neurodivergent. And so this person asked me, well, wasn't it after Matan Torah? I thought everyone was healed. Are you then saying that there was nothing defective about it? I wrote her back and I said, let me ask you, but just between me and you, not for public statements, not something I would say on the Let's Get Real show with Coach Menachem where people are going to hear it. But when Mashiach comes, do you think that people who are neurodivergent will become neurotypical? My answer is no. No. Why should they become? Because something is unusual, then it needs to become usual in order to be fixed. When Mashiach comes, the world will be more accommodating. And each person, with the way they're wired, there will be more opportunities, all the opportunities. So, sometimes the problem isn't in the in the gavra, it's in the hefza. It's not the person, it's the situation or the thing. And if we as a community can just sort of recognize that and understand that accommodation, we spoke a lot about accommodation tonight. It's interesting how the conversation sort of flowed into that. But advocacy, accommodation, self-advocacy, communicating your needs. But imagine if the community were just more readily accommodating to understand, yeah, different people do have different needs and they're just different. Anyways, God willing, we'll see more and more of that.
Yeah, Bezrat Hashem, someone was telling me about, 30 years ago, feeling shame for having a child with, developmental disabilities, very, very obvious differences, and sort of explaining to me the process that the frum world has gone through of people like really not, there's no stigma around having a child with Down syndrome. We don't have that stigma anymore. It happens. There's a lot of services. It's still a challenge, and it's not, the stigma is basically gone. I think in the last 10 years, the stigma around ADHD has moved substantially. And I think for parents to get to a place of this is different and I'm going to need a whole different toolbox and a lot more support than I thought, without the guilt and the shame and the blame and the isolation, is where we're headed. And one step further, I think Rabbi Taub and I are both very passionate about helping people enjoy their child who is quirky and funny and great and really challenging all at the same time.
Well, okay, let's go to the closing part. Okay, so first of all, thank you, Rabbi Taub and Dr. Bass, for coming on tonight. Really appreciate it. I'm getting so many texts from people like this is like such an important topic. I have to be honest with you, before discussing this topic, I didn't even ever hear this word. So I'm going to be honest with you. So and then people are just saying that they're suffering from this for years, and it's so amazing to bring it out in the public. So, Menachem, every day we learn something new.
When you don't know, you don't know.
Okay, I said I don't know everything, I guess. I thought I did, but I guess I don't. Again, thank you for Rabbi Taub. And
you only did 220 episodes.
I know. After 1,000 episodes, if I say I don't know something, that'll be the chiddush.
But that is interesting. That is
another
interesting.
15 years to go. Yeah. So again, thank you for coming on. Tremendous chizuk on this topic. And hopefully people will sign up for this program with Dr. Bass or Rabbi Taub starting Tuesday night. I sent out the link, but Menachem will email it. It's something very important. And obviously, if you're in the sugya, it's obviously be very helpful. Again, anybody's here. Every Sunday night at 9 p.m. on the Zoom ID, we have different shiurim, different topics. Next week, February 16th, we're going to have a very deep shir with an amazing deep person, Rabbi Yaakov Kirsch. It's a world-famous speaker, deep thinker, and the program is titled, What is My Soul Seeking? A Deep Dive into Hashem, Spirituality, and the Afterlife. It should be an amazing program. Please join us. Everything in Menachem is recorded on menachemberfel.com. If there's any questions, please email coachmenachem@gmail.com. Tonight's shir is 220. And they're all recorded. You can listen to it on the phone at 732-305-9011 on YouTube and on Google platform and on Menachem's website and on all the podcasts, from Apple to Spotify, 24/6, all of them, they're all there. Again, thank you to all the advertising sponsors like with Scoop, Ellen Arrow, 5 Town Central, Chayla Kaplan from JCN. And now we're going to go to the closing segment. We're going to go first to Menachem first, then Rabbi Dr. Bass will go first after Menachem, and then Rabbi Taub will wrap it up. Coach Menachem, you go first.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Taub and Dr. Bass. Yeah, it's those who need to know about it know about it. And many haven't heard of the word, neurodiverse, and there are those who are learning from tonight, and just putting it out there, being able to talk about it is an amazing thing. So just to understand, everybody, self-acceptance, like we heard, to be able to advocate for yourself, bringing in the language to say, this is how I work, this is how my brain works. And it really, the self-acceptance is not easy for, many people, especially if you're struggling and you can see the differences. So, I just want to mention that it's not easy. Like we started in the beginning, in the moment. Think about it. In the moment, the child can't think, many parents can't think. There's so much going on, you're like ready to give up. A lot of work, inner work, and to understand with the support that you're gonna, get the support that you need. And then after all the years talking about burnouts, it's like we have to have something on the way, that's gonna give you the chiyas to continue to be able to see the positives, to build the relationship. Yeah. So yeah, like we heard, we need a lot of love, love, self-love, love in the relationship, being able to see the positives. And like we started with the gematria, the abundance of love, the hava rava, because it's not easy. So thank you very much. And Mitzvah Hashem, those, all of us, we should have a lot of siyata d'shmaya, talking about chinuch. Without Hashem, we can't do anything. And when it comes to these challenges, we're like, pull out the tillum. And Mitzvah Hashem, we should see the help. We should feel it inside of us so that we can forge that relationship, so that when the kids get older, they can be open without the shame. Mitzvah Hashem. Shkoyach.
Okay, Dr. Bass, closing words.
Okay, so usually Rabbi Taub does the spiritual, but coming off what Coach Menachem just said, I'm gonna go with the Ava Rabbah that I have been in a really dark place in my own parenting, and I'm really at a place now where that experience in itself was a Hava Rabbah, right? I am so grateful that Hashem sent me this child, because he's a phenomenal person, but also because I had to pull myself literally up to another state of consciousness, right? In the lowest plane of reality, our kids can be a pain in the neck, right? Not just our neurodivergent kids, all of our kids. And up one level of consciousness, our kids are our greatest gift in personal growth and self-development. There's a very personal tikkun that gets sent to us in the walls of our own home because we can work on our deepest stuff. Before I'm Choser B'tshuva, and I did that whole meditation thing before I came to Judaism, and what I was looking for in meditation I found in my child, right? That I wanted some higher level of consciousness. I wanted to be some elevated being, but I wanted to do it by removing myself from the world. And Hashem went, oh no, oh no, that's not actually where the highest spiritual growth and self-development is, right? That bringing things down from my idealism, what I wanted parenting to be, into the thick of a 3-hour-long meltdown because I cut a cucumber he wanted whole. That is the deepest work I have ever done on myself. And so I give you all the bracha that through this journey, you should be able to look back and it should become revealed good, even as in the thick of it, in the day-to-day of it, it is hard.
Thank you, Dr. Bass. That was beautiful. Rabbi Taub, the final pitch. But before you go for the final pitch, everybody keeps on texting me. Will the program that you're doing with Dr. Bass Tuesday for the 6-week program, will it be a recording if they can't attend? Can they watch it later?
Yeah. The timing is, by the way, because Dr. Bass is in Eretz Yisrael, People don't realize she got up at 4 a.m. or probably earlier than 4 a.m., but our 9 p.m. was her 4 a.m. So the time of the live meetings is it 1 o'clock or 1:30 New York time?
It's 1 o'clock, so people can be done by 2:30. And I am going to wake up again at 4 o'clock in the morning for a live Q&A for working mothers. I'm also a full-time working mother. I watch every class I take on recording. But I'm gonna wake up one more time for those of you in America so that you get at least one live Q&A with me. But we also have an online forum. So 24/6, you can type in, I really can't get my kid to eat.
Dr. Bass, you'll send Menachem all that information so he could send it out to all the viewers. A lot of people want to join that forum.
No,
That's
so
part of the
that forum is
course.
part of the course. That
Oh,
forum
part-
is part of the course.
You'll sign up
Yeah,
for our
I
course.
can't manage a totally public forum. It's just for people in the course.
Right, it's just for the course.
drelyssabass.com/Taub Bass, and you can read all the details and what you get and when you get it and that kind of stuff.
And it was to answer the original question, if you can't be on at 1 p.m. Eastern, yes, there are recordings. Yes, there are recordings. And as Dr. Bass was saying, there's the forum, which is open 24/6. And you can get support in between the weekly video conferences on the forum. And
We are really going to do our best in 6 weeks to help you feel like you've got people who really get it, who can help you make spiritual meaning and also really practical help you through your day-to-day.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful that it will give a lot of chizuk. In addition to all the practical tools that I know that it'll give, it should just give people a lot of hope and encouragement. Let me just close up here. First of all, I'm really happy to know. I'm happy but unhappy that this was the first time in 220 episodes that we spoke about this topic, but I'm happy that now it's out there, and I'm happy that you're already getting responses from people indicating that they probably want more. And of course, they can sign up for our course and get more, but I'm just hinting here. You guys know that I'm always happy to come on the Let's Get Real with Coach Menachem. So if you'll invite us back to do a part 2, you let me know. And even if it's Super Bowl Sunday, I'll be there. Okay. Let me just really quickly share the following with you. I mentioned earlier that I made this clip talking about Nadav and Avihu as being neurodivergent or possibly neurodivergent personality types. So the question that was posed to me was, where do you find this concept of neurodivergence in the Bible? Because everything has to be in the Torah. So where is it in Torah? What's the mucker? So I said there may be many different places, but this is one example. And I explained, Nadav and Avihu, there are many things about them that are sort of, I'm not giving them a diagnosis, understood. I'm saying there are a lot of qualities about them that resemble qualities we know that certain types of children have. For instance, we know the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says the reason that they died when they were in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is because they were overwhelmed with the desire to leave their bodies. They just were sort of pulled into the bliss of being one with Hashem. So right there, you have this concept that we started to share with tonight about people who are uncomfortable in their own bodies, that the soul doesn't really get integrated in that Bal Korchocha Tochai that the Mishnah in Ove says, that the soul has to be compelled into a body. That really is in its most obvious form in such people, that the soul is never really settled, and you get that terminal uniqueness or that feeling of lonely in a crowded room, or always wanting to be a part of something and instead feeling apart from. That's one thing. Another thing, Nadav and Avihu weren't married. And Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, has to be married. They weren't married. So that's another feature like that. First of all, we spoke a lot about tonight where particularly certain issues that a person might have of oversensitivity, marriage can trigger a lot of that. But also, what does marriage represent? Represents dira b'tachtonim, building something here in this world. bringing souls from heaven into bodies. It really is a statement about your belief in doing something here in the physical world. And a soul that wants to leave the physical world or is uncomfortable in the physical world, would have a hard time, obviously, with marriage and family. Another thing it says about Nadav and Avihu, these are all from Medrash Chazal, is that they were shtuya yain, they drank, which is evident from context that right after the story, Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron, you're not allowed to drink when you enter the Beis HaMikdash. I didn't get to mention this at all tonight, but self-medicating, that is a real hallmark of a neurodivergent personality, somebody who's stressed out, that the business of life itself is stressful. We spoke about that. Just going through a day is causing these rushes of adrenaline, cortisol. So yeah, drinking or any other distraction or numbness or screens or whatever, that's definitely a common feature of that type of personality. And I mentioned a fourth thing. I said the fact that they didn't do what they were supposed to do. They brought the fire into the Kodesh HaKadoshim when it was unauthorized. Okay, so they had a problem with social hierarchy. Like this is another, we alluded to this, we touched upon this tonight. Like we didn't go into it in depth, but sometimes these kids are branded as rebellious, as chutzpahdik. Why? Because they don't understand. Why should you listen to someone just because they're an adult, just because they're a rabbi, just because they're a parent? And they're not trying to be rebellious. Their brain is kind of just not getting that thing that most people sort of just accept at some point, that, okay, you defer to these people and you just do what you're told. So at any rate, I'm sharing all of this with you, not even to tell you this vote, but I'm really telling you this because of the reaction that it got online. So I have a big social media following, and a lot of the people there are not Jewish. And when you get up to those kinds of numbers, of course, it gets much bigger than the Jewish community. It was so interesting. Normally, when non-Jews, particularly Christians, will comment on my content, they're very supportive. Oh, thank you, Rabbi, for teaching me this. This is such a interesting level of the Bible that I didn't know about. What was fascinating, and I could never have predicted this, the religious Christians were very, very upset at this video. And they said, in my Bible, it says they were rebellious, and you're trying to make them holy. In fact, I even mentioned that Moshe Rabbeinu told Aaron that they were holier than us, right? Which is what Rashi says, that they were holier than us, that I knew that the Mishkan would be sanctified by Kedoshim. Apparently, they were the biggest Kedoshim because they were the ones that Hashem chose. And we all know this. This is a Rashi. This is basic Torah Sheba'al Peh. But these people who are only reading their English translation of the Bible, they're reading it as, what are you talking about? They were rebellious. They broke the law. They got punished. A lot of the comments were very harsh, like they defied God and they were punished with death. And for me, that experience, the effect it had on me was like, yep, there it is again. That if you don't know the story, if you don't unpack it, if you don't, in this instance, if you don't have Medrash Chazal and Torah Sheba'al Peh to explain what was really happening, and you're just reading pshat. So they were bad kids, they were rebellious, they broke the rules, they got punished, that's what they deserve. And, all it would take is just a little openness to peel away the layers and to understand the story on a deeper level. And all of a sudden you realize these people you thought were so bad and worthy of punishment, actually Moshe Rabbeinu was saying about them, they're holier than me. They're holier than me. So it should humble us that there's more than meets the eye. There's always more than meets the eye.
Or Taub, you got muted. You have to unmute.
Okay. Yeah, I said there's always more than meets the eye. And in life in general, there's more than meets the eye, but especially with our children, there's more than meets the eye, especially with complex children where you're looking at it as defiant, you're looking at it as difficult, you're looking at it as a meltdown. But if you peel away the layers and get to understand what's happening in the pneumius of it, you're actually dealing with very lofty souls. And but let me put it into simple words, one sentence. We should be humble. We should be open to understanding things on a deeper level. We should be compassionate.
Right.
Amen. Okay, thank you everybody for joining tonight. We'll see you next week, next Sunday night, February 16th, 9 p.m. with Rabbi Yaakov Kirsch. What is my soul seeking? Should be a deep conversation. Please join us. Thank you again, Rabbi Taub and Dr. Bass.
Early morning. Thank you.
Yes, have a wonderful day.
Right.
Everybody have a wonderful night. Take care. Goodbye.
Bye.